So welcome everyone, good afternoon. So this is the AGM for Northeast Asset Ccg, and as many of you probably know, as of April 2022, CCGs will be disbanded and taken over by the integrated care system. So I think, I don't know for sure, this is going to be our last AGM. Probably is my last AGM anyway. I'm not sure what happens after April 2022. So I wanted to just say one quick line about it being an honour for those of you who won't be signing in for the board meetings that we've still got to go till the end of this financial year. Second thing is really, I realise this is nearly October 2021 and we're talking about the financial year April 20 to 21, so it seems a distant past, but in reality, and quite unfortunately, it isn't really that different now than it was in April. Although, you know, as a nation and as across the world, I think we're in a better place. I think sadly we're still in the midst of a pandemic, and so we're still struggling to see the other side. So though it feels 6 months ago, it doesn't actually feel that much like 6 months ago. And I also wanted to take the opportunity to thank all the CCG staff, in case I forget later on. So, you know, for all the work they put in the year 2021, it was a hard slog for all of us. And so I'm really grateful to everyone that put in all those extra hours and all the effort, particularly around the vaccine work and everything to do with COVID, to be honest. And equally, that thanks goes out to all our partners and their staff and all our colleagues out in the system, as well as our patients for really bearing with us. And finally, just wanted to highlight a couple of key things from the year 2021, which I had to rack my brains over, but from the exec summary, and three big things really. One, the vaccine, which I think has been a huge success for us globally. So I'm really grateful for everyone that took part in that and contributed to that. Second, obviously 2021 was a year where we commissioned our community contract for a value of over 400 million with our alliance partners. Now this is an exciting prospect for us, and it has actually been live now for going on 6 months. And unlike previous large contracts where you get lots of teething problems, I don't think really I've come across any. I may have been sheltered and protected from them, of course, but actually I haven't come across any. So I think it's been a huge success to date, and I'm really excited about the future with it. And I hope the ICS takes it on board and runs with it and really improves it even further. And the last big thing we did was we recommissioned the 3 surgeries down in Clacton, which was a procurement which came after sustained feedback from patients. You know, we listened to everyone's concerns. We went back to try to figure out a solution. And again, a bit like the community contract, I've not heard anything against that in terms of it being anything other than a success. So I hope that continues. There are other things obviously within the annual report, and we'll hear about that shortly, but I would encourage you please to take some time to have a read and read about all our successes and some of our challenges. And on that note, I'm going to pass over to you, Jane, if that's okay.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So what I'm going to do is just take a few minutes to talk about the annual report and accounts and the accompanying audit report on those. So I'll cover all of that in one go rather than splitting it into separate items. So first of all, just to say to people who are avid followers of the CCG, the format of our annual report for the last couple of years has been slightly shorter than it was prior to the COVID pandemic. There was a recognition at national level that that there's an awful lot of staff who needed to be redeployed into work on the COVID pandemic, and in particular clinical staff not needing to free up time to support that. So the requirements around the annual report have been reduced in the last couple of years. However, I would still say that there's some very interesting elements in there, and it does provide a good overall summary of the work that we undertook as a CCG during that year. Within there are sections on, in particular, the Northeast Essex Health and Wellbeing Alliance and the work that we undertook during the year there, and particularly in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And there's also information on how the CCG, as part of the wider integrated care system, took its part in the vaccination programme. Obviously, now we're sort of 6 months away from the financial year end. It is slightly out of date, but hopefully it still gives a good overall feel for the work that we did during that year. So I'm going to talk about the annual accounts specifically. If you are looking at the pack of papers, I'm going to just take you through the short number of slides that I've included within there, which give you some highlights from the overall accounts. In terms of key messages for that financial year, we as a CCG, we broke even. So we received just shy of £680 million to spend, and we spent all of those resources. For anyone who's eagle-eyed and is comparing the 2021 amounts of money with the 1920, they did go up significantly during the year. And the reason for that is that we were working under emergency financial measures. And in the second half of the year, resources for our provider organisations flowed through the CCG to be passed straight on to for them to deal with the COVID response. And Northeast Asset Ccg very kindly acted as the banker for the system, and so the funds which went onto our partners at Esneft and at the Ambulance Trust both flowed through Northeast Essex, leading to an increase of approximately 20% on the previous year. The NHS was given significant resources to deal with the COVID pandemic. Some of those came directly to the services that we buy directly as a CCG. So we also saw some increases in those. But I'll take you onto a pie chart on the next slide around what the CCG spent overall. I also mentioned on this slide that we received an unqualified audit report, including a new narrative report on use of resources, which I'll come on to later. But one thing I did really want to point out is the...
sorry to interrupt you, but just two things. First, really sorry, I forgot to do declaration of interests because I'm clearly a bit rusty. And then, so can I just make sure there are no declarations of interest related to anything on the agenda? And the second is, are you meant to be sharing slides? Because I know you're talking through this.
No, these slides are in the pack, Hassan. So I was assuming that people were. I can share them if you would like me to.
I think it might just be a bit easier for people to follow if we could share slides, because I know you're talking through them, but just in case there's people who've got issues trying to look at the two things at once, it might just be a little bit easier if you don't mind.
I will have a go. I think I've pretty much finished that one. I will share the next slide, which has got a pie chart on it. So the last thing I wanted to say on that slide was just that the CCG has a role in making sure that we are a responsible payer in the system. And one thing I'm really pleased to report is that we paid over 93% of our invoices within the 30-day timetable. Hopefully that meant that we helped both our local economy as well as our local providers in being able to pay their staff and their invoices on time. So that's, as I say, one of the key financial targets that we met as a CCG. So I'll now attempt to share my screen. It doesn't always go right when I do this, but I will do my best. Just bear with me. Hopefully you can now see a pie chart. Is that? Yeah. John's nodding his head. So this is just a breakdown of what we spent as a CCG during the 2021 financial year, and there'll be no surprise to anyone that the vast majority of what we spent our money on was on services from NHS bodies and other organisations, including Essex County Council, healthcare from private providers, non-NHS providers, prescribing and primary care, and that makes up over 97% of our total expenditure. One of the really good news stories for Northeast Essex for the financial year 2021 was that despite all the pressures around COVID, we managed to, through our meds management team and the great work of primary care, we managed to keep a cap on our prescribing expenditure, which only went up by 2% despite all the extra work that we needed to do around COVID, and that's lower than the overall expenditure increase across the CCG. So that indicates really good work in that area. Overall, we did see some significant increases on primary care costs overall, around about 13% year on year, reflecting some of the changes that we've made within primary care from year to year. And just pointing out that the pie chart doesn't include any of the direct costs of COVID vaccination because they are held separately, but it does include the CCG's contribution to the overall programme in terms of staffing, etc. I will move on to the next slide. Apologies that I'm having to scroll. It's not a PowerPoint presentation. So the next slide is, and sorry, I've said this, the various AGMs that are presented at this week. If you're old like me, you will know it as the balance sheet, but it's more recently known as the statement of financial position for the CCG. Just to point out, as I have done in previous years, we are an unusual organisation insofar as we don't hold physical assets. So we don't have any properties that we own as an organisation, and unlike a hospital, we don't have significant amounts of equipment. So our balance sheet does look quite strange. The other thing to point out is that we also, whilst we are given a cash limit from NHS England against which we can draw down, we only draw down the cash as it's needed. So we don't hold significant balances in our bank account as a CCG, that being held centrally. So the couple of things to point out for during the year in terms of the changes in our balance sheet, we had a decrease in both receivables, which I would know as debtors, and payables, which I would know as creditors, which were basically associated with the change in the financial regime due to COVID. Because we acted as a banker and passed through block payments to our main providers, it ended up with very significant reductions in the amount of invoices that were passing backwards and forwards between organisations, hopefully freeing up time for people to work on other things rather than central bureaucracy. But the result of that is that it did significantly reduce both our in and out of NHS invoicing. We also saw an increase in provisions due mainly due to in respect of the contract exit costs, which we are expected to be a one-off for this year only. So that they are the main changes on our balance sheet for the year. Oops, I've clicked on too quickly there. Apologies for that. My final slide is really just to kind of say that that was the financial year that we finished on the 31st of March, and we're obviously now significantly almost halfway into the 21-22 financial year. And it's fair to say that normal financial arrangements have not yet resumed for the NHS. We are still working under a hybrid model where we still have some of the emergency arrangements in place. We are awaiting our funding announcement for the second half of the year, which starts in a couple of days. So hopefully it will come through very soon. And within the announcements that we have heard for the first half of the year, what we're expecting for the second half of the year is that uplifts for services directly commissioned by the CCG have been quite low, and they have led to some cost pressures, particularly in areas such as continuing healthcare. So we will need to look at our H2 allocations and work out how best to deal with those. I'm pleased to say that within Northeast Asset Ccg, we anticipate that we will have sufficient room to cover those as we move forward. We are expecting 22-23, so 1st of April, to see more of a move back to a normal financial process across the NHS. But obviously that will coincide with, as Hassan mentioned earlier, what we're expecting to be the end of the CCGs and the formation of the integrated care system. And as part of that, we are expecting the funding for the 3 CCGs that make up the integrated care system to be combined into the new integrated care system, which will give an overall bigger funding pot and should increase flexibility. However, we know that what's really important is that we are able to report and understand resources at different levels. So the work that we are undertaking at the moment is hopefully going to enable us both to be able to report at that larger ICS level, but to maintain reporting and responsibility at our place level, our alliances, but also down into localities, primary care networks and integrated neighbourhood teams. So that's all I wanted to say on the accounts, Chair. Shall I move straight on to the audit report and then take any questions after that?
Yeah, we've not had any public questions, so if we crack on, then we can do it all together, I think.
Great, thank you. So I didn't want to say an awful lot about the audit report other than to point out that it's a joint report across the 3 CCGs that will make up the new integrated care system. As I said earlier, it now has, across the public sector, there's been a change in requirements around audit opinions this year, and for anyone who looks at these things in detail, you'll notice that this report's quite a lot longer, and the reason for that is that there's been a detailed piece of work done over the summer looking at use of resources, or value for money in other terms, of the CCG. So our auditors, BDO, did a detailed piece of work looking at our governance arrangements, the way that we set budgets, the way that we deal with contracts, and it's looked at those, and if you've had the chance to read the report, you'll see that they've given quite a lot of narrative explanation and highlighted quite a few areas of good practice, which is great. So in the way that auditors do, they only report on whether or not there are significant weaknesses, and I'm pleased to say that they did not find any significant weaknesses in our use of resources in Northeast Asset Ccg or in the wider system. The report also contains comments on the CCG's annual accounts, and I'm pleased to say that that is an unqualified opinion, which overall is a true and fair, suggests that the CCG is given a true and fair view of the accounts in its presentation. So that was all I wanted to say, Chair. So apologies that that because of that use of resources and that extra work that our AGM has been later this year, we do anticipate that that work, which will be repeated next year, will be done in time for a July annual general meeting, albeit that that will probably be under the new integrated care system.
Oh, thank you, Jane. So just before we do move on to questions, I might just give myself a slap on the wrist, because the one thing I'm supposed to do is maintain process, and I missed out the DOI, and I also missed out apologies. So I'm just going to take a step backwards and just note the apologies that I've received, which is Ed and Richard, I think. Is that right, Joe?
No, there's a few more than that. So there was apologies from Ed, Paul, Jabara, and Daniel Land and Richard.
Perfect. Okay. Sorry, for the purpose of minutes, we could just record those. That'd be useful. And I would be worried about getting the sack, but seeing as I won't be doing the AGM next year, that's not really a worry, is it? So I can be maverick today. So if we come back to questions, so has anybody got any questions? It's going to be a short meeting, isn't it? No. So Pam, I realise you had some IT glitches at the start, and I'm sorry I didn't get to bring you in. Is there anything you wanted to add before we move to close?
Yeah, thank you, Hassan. I think it's just appropriate to say, after the year that we're reporting on, you mentioned it, that it was an incredibly difficult year, and I'm absolutely humbled and proud to have led the team locally through that difficult year, and particularly with the successes we saw around vaccination and the relationships we saw build so strongly between our community, our voluntary sector, and our primary care, as well as our districts, boroughs and local authority colleagues, which without that, I think our population would have suffered significantly more harm and death. At one point during the rollout of vaccination programme, against all the odds and managing around one of the most deprived populations in the country, we actually managed to vaccinate the highest rate of adults in tendering. That's remarkable. You know, if you'd have had a league table of who could do it and do it the fastest, they wouldn't have ever picked that little part of Northeast Essex to achieve that. That comes from the support that we've garnered through the way of working through the ICS, but also through the local relationships and the alliance that is now going to be the local successor of that place that is Northeast Essex. I find it really interesting when we talk about geography, but Northeast Essex, whoever you talk to, has been a place for as long as it's been a place. So Boadicea definitely commanded over this area and took the geography to her heart. And since then, I don't think it's ever been particularly challenged. It's got everything from our coastal communities to our ethnically diverse parts of Colchester. And I think what we've demonstrated in the setup of the alliance and the governance that this board has enabled us to have locally is now resonating across the country. So we should be proud of the moves that we've made and the development and transition that we have made through the year that we're talking about here, despite the very significant challenges that health saw. The garnering of those really strong relationships and the movement forward in the governance and interaction with districts, boroughs, local authority, as I said earlier. Some of that governance is reflected very heavily in the guidance on how to ICS for the future. And that is a guide written by the King's Fund, and you will see references to what this board delegated down to Northeast Essex Alliance. So the transition we made in the year that we're referring to here has been significant, and it continues. So if we don't have another AGM, I want to recognise the efforts of the whole system in Northeast Essex, the incredible intelligence and tenacity and resilience that the CCG staff have demonstrated by downing tools from their day jobs and getting out there and vaccinating as well. We saw that across the patch, but we saw a most significant effort around our care homes and domiciliary patients. So it's a well done. It's a, you know, thank you as the Chief Operating Officer of Northeast Essex for the board's support through that year, and for the continued support to develop us as a legacy following the CCG's closure. So I think it's important that that's recognised.
Thank you, Pam, and thank you, of course, as well. So I'm just going to pause for a second, just in case there have been any last-minute questions coming in from the public. Joe, do you know, have we had any more?
I haven't received any, no.
Okay, perfect. In which case, Jerry.
Yeah, just to add to what our version of Bodicea has just said, I'd just like to publicly thank the finance teams. It's the first year of dealing with a new set of auditors, and I know that they did have to make additional efforts this year to actually get us a clean bill of health, and I think it's worth acknowledging that. And also, as usual, the person who produced the annual report, I think they've done a great job as well. So thanks on both those counts.
Thank you. Who's that? Frida. Sorry.
Oh yeah, hi. Just as this is our last AGM, most likely, I would just like to say I've been elected member since 2012 in Northeast Essex Ccg. They started off as a rocky start, as most people can remember, but or people who were there can remember. But I feel that I've developed, and I can only just say thank you to everyone I've met and worked with. I've enjoyed you all for various reasons, from the Brexit conversations with Martin to the coffee and chocolate biscuits with Jerry and everyone, to being told to be quiet by Lisa just because I was talking too much. All those things will bring back really lovely memories of this. And I just want to say how proud I am to have been part of this organisation. It's been an incredible experience, and I really learned so much from all of you. So thank you very, very much. And I mean that really genuinely. Thank you.
Thank you, Frida. I don't know anyone's logging how many times I said the word thank you in this meeting, but I don't think I've merely said it enough. And it's also turning a bit depressing because it's turning into a bye-bye meeting. We've still got 6 months to go. We've got quite a lot to do. We've achieved quite a lot, and we will carry on achieving, and we're handing over to an ICS that I hope will take a lot of this and build on it and be even better. So, so it needs to be a bit cheerier than that. Just a last minute check to see if there's any AOB. I haven't been advised by anyone, so now's your chance to say if there is. Out my way because it's okay. In which case, my final thank you, Jane, for guiding us through that quite painlessly, and thank you to you all. And so we'll wait and see whether or not there is another AGM. I think, technically speaking, there needs to be a report or an annual report and accounts presented. I don't know who presents it, whether it's us or the new organisation that takes it forward. But you know, should that be me, I'll see you back again, and this will all just be classed as a bit of an anticlimax. But if that's not, assuming that's not the case, as Frida said, grateful for the opportunity to have been chair. Thank you everyone for making it painless, and we've still got about 4 board meetings to go. So I'll see you at board next week. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Hassan.
Thank you.